Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We are very, very lucky to be actually in the same city with the wonderful Laura McAllister. She is in Istanbul for the Champions League final, and we thought rather than sitting in different rooms on our computers, why not share the screen in the same room? So we are very happy to be hosting you in Istanbul. Welcome to my beautiful city and beautiful country. You've got an amazing CV and a bio that I can read out, but usually in our leadership courses, we try to teach our participants how to present themselves. Because a lot of the times we are, as women, maybe a little bit afraid to talk about our achievements and all the wonderful things we've done. So I'm going to flip it over to you and ask you to introduce yourself so that it also serves as an example to our wonderful participants.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you very much, Bruce. Lovely to be here in Turkey and in the wonderful city of Istanbul, ahead of the Men's Champions League match on Saturday, of course. So it's a real pleasure to be here with women in football. Yes, I mean, I've got to sort of make myself do those things still, because I guess the first thing to say about my career and my profile is that, you know, I'm not somebody who likes to be in the limelight. I'm an introvert by personality. So I've had to kind of learn how to do a lot of the things that are pretty critical, as you say, to being a successful woman. But I recognize that you have to make the effort to do those. So I do, and I have done, and I encourage other women to do that, really. So I guess what I would say about where I am now, and then maybe we can talk a bit about the stages to get to where I am now, is that I'm somebody who is very passionate about driving football forward, and not just women's football, but football more generally. And I'm conscious that my voice is usefully a voice from having played the game. I played for Wales 24 times. Somebody who's been involved in the administration and the governance of the game. Somebody who's got daughters, young daughters who play the game. And really importantly, and people often miss this out, I'm a football fan. You know, I grew up as a mad keen Cardiff City fan. And I went to my first game when I was 3 years old, and my first Welsh international when I was 4. So it's always been a really important part of my life. And I think now, having the platform of being involved with UEFA and having previously been involved with the Football Association of Wales, then it's given me some agency as well. And I hope that I can use that to obviously benefit other women and other people in football to make sure it's a game for everyone.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And I think your sort of long-awaited role, we've been always keeping our fingers crossed this time around, as well as in the last election. You're now on the UEFA Exco and a vice chair, vice president. Can you talk us a little bit through the process and what it involved? It wasn't an easy process, of course.
No, but I think like all achievements, sometimes the troublesome journeys reach the best destinations. And yes, my journey to being a member of the executive committee of UEFA, and as you say, a vice president now, is one that's got a fair few obstacles along the way. I mean, I tried to stand, first of all, for a position on FIFA back in 2016. And as you know, and I'm sure lots of the women and men on the call know, that there's a designated position for each of the confederations on FIFA Council. So UEFA has one woman's place, as do each of the other confederations. And I tried to stand for that, but because of the British Vice Presidency, which is a designated place for the British associations, I was not, by the constitutional protocols, allowed to stand. And I was really pleased that we then campaigned, the FAW, the Football Association of Wales, campaigned to change that regulation, which they did. So I was able to stand for that position in 2021, 2 years ago. And I lost fairly narrowly to Evelina Cristolin, who is from Italy and is the incumbent representative from UEFA on FIFA Council. But I lost by just 6 votes. And I think by popular agreement, that was a good campaign. And it showed that a newcomer to that world could still challenge incumbents and powerful countries like Italy. I mean, I'm from a relatively small country in Wales, and nobody much knew who I was at that point. So that was in 2021. And really then, I'm an academic by profession, so I went back to my academic work and didn't give much thought as to what might happen next. And then it became apparent that I was being encouraged to go for the UEFA Exco vacancy in the Congress in April earlier this year. So just, 7 or 8 weeks ago. And I had lots of conversations with people, and most people seemed to think that was a good moment for me to stand, which I did. The FAW nominated me to stand for the position. And fortunately, because it was a very busy time for me, nobody stood against me. So I was elected, as they say, by acclamation in UEFA in the Congress in Lisbon in April. So I'm really new to the job. I'm literally 8 weeks in. Yeah. And I certainly didn't expect to be asked to be a vice president. The president, Alexander Shefrin, took me aside after the Congress and asked if I'd be willing to take on the role of vice president, which of course is a great honour and a great responsibility as well, but something that is really important because I'm the first woman to be in that role. And I appreciate that brings with it a great profile, but also a great responsibility to do it well and to make sure that it's in the interests of other women.
Yeah, I think several questions are rising out of that, and I'm going to go off text now as well. But how important is it to be able to potentially face, failure and loss, but put yourself out there? Because many of our members, either in our roundtables or webinars or during the leadership courses, always talk about fears of failure and not necessarily trying something because if they feel it could, hurt their ego. Yes. And because we don't try, we don't know if we're going to win the election or not. So very similar maybe to you. When I put up my candidacy back in 2010 for the ECA board seat, everybody thought, wow, so brave, so courageous, go for it, but you'll never win. And I said, fine, I might lose, but I won't know if I will win unless I try. So yes, I did manage to get on the board, and very similar to you, I think once you go over that barrier, the great Karl-Heinz Rummenigge asked me to become the vice chair of one of the committees that he was chairing, for example. So I think putting us out there is a little bit scary, but unless we do that, we're not going to break some of these barriers.
For sure, and I think you're a pioneer in the game, and you've achieved some fantastic things. But you've also had disappointments and blows, as I have, and I think if you've played sport, then you can adjust to loss and disappointment probably more easily, because you invariably lose more games than you play, especially if you're from a small country or a smaller club. And it's always, for me, it's always been about what one can take from defeat or loss and learn and integrate into the next challenge that lies ahead. And I suppose I took that approach to standing for elections in FIFA and UEFA as well. I mean, first and foremost, I knew I had something to offer. I knew that my background in football, as a woman in football, but also as a woman who's been involved in strategic work on sport more generally, because my background's been as a board member of UK Sport and a chair of Sport Wales, which obviously looks after a whole range of sports. So I was confident that I had something to offer. And of course, we can't campaign for improved diversity in football governance unless we're all prepared to stick our heads above the parapet and drive change. So I was prepared to lose, certainly in the FIFA election when I stood, but it still hurts and it's still disappointing. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, because, I knew that I had a strong candidacy. I knew that my profile was probably right for FIFA at that time. But we all know in football elections, that's not all that counts. There are lots of other political dynamics going on. And it's very hard to defeat an incumbent candidate in any sports election, as we know. So it was against the odds, really, for me to win. But we came within 6 votes of unseating the candidate, which is great. But what I would say to everyone, listening is that I think you have to embrace the possibility of defeat. And almost kind of rehearse what that feels like so that it's not a terrible shock to you. And I've always done that. I've always thought, well, I might not get this or I might not win. And therefore, I feel I can manage the process better. But also remember that losing builds up your resilience. You become tougher. And the trick is the sweet spot between resilience and not caring or overconfidence. If you can find that sweet spot between a kind of inner resilience, but also being receptive to other opportunities that come your way and not dogged or dogmatic about the path that lies ahead. So, I definitely say to people, don't be frightened of failure because, sport is all about defeat. It has to be. Somebody's got to lose everything, that happens in sport. And most people who've lost something go on to win. So, embrace it in that way.
Yeah, exactly. The transferable skills from a playing career, right?
Yeah,
learning to lose gracefully and getting up and going forward again. So what do you think will be different as a result of your appointment to the ExCo? You obviously bring lots of experience and talent. And what will be some of your personal priorities and the work you will do with it?
I think it remains to be seen, Ebru, at the moment. But I'm the only woman on ExCo, which is disappointing. But I hope that will change over time. It's really important that we get a better gender balance on all UEFA and FIFA structures. But for now, I'm the only woman on ExCo, which will be unusual for me because I've, worked in Wales and where, we have more gender equal organisational frameworks generally. But hey, it brings a few advantages as well in that, you're different to everyone else in the room. For me, when I come into organisations fresh, I think the first thing that has to be done, and that's probably the stage I'm at now, is establishing relationships and credibility. So I'm doing my best to get to know my fellow ExCo members. Events like this week are very useful because we're traveling. We've been in Prague, obviously, for the Europa Conference League, and now we're in Istanbul. So we're all together for 4 or 5 days. It gives you a chance to talk in the margins, doesn't it, with your colleagues and get to know what they're about and what motivates and interests them. So I think that's the first stage that we need to do. And then I think you establish credibility because, I know that my background in football is as strong as anybody else's. So I'm not, nervous about that. But I think then it's a case of where you decide to utilize your skills to best effect. And one can't do everything. And it's a really important exercise to work out where there may be dividends rather than battles which can't be won. I think sometimes it's easy to go for battles because we care passionately about the area, but sometimes it's better to step back a bit and see if that battle can be won at that moment. Otherwise, one's investing a lot of time and effort in something that really there's no escape from. So I prefer to sort of do some kind of tactical assessment of where there may be opportunities to influence and impact and invest my time and energy in that. And it sounds a little bit cynical, but I think we've got to be pragmatic about that really in order to use our time effectively.
Well, I always say it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And using your energy well and your voice well requires picking the right fights as well picking every fight because unfortunately as women we may be quickly labeled as too aggressive or not collaborative. We unfortunately face many difficulties and barriers, but it's very important to, I think, be the expert in the room in a certain topic, whatever it is. For me, it's always been more around finance. Maybe for you, it's more about governance. But I talk a lot about T-shaped people. So you're grounded within your knowledge base, but also building the skills around it. And that knowledge base brings people to you, respecting your expertise, and you become the go-to person. Whether it's the board or department or organization. So that's something that worked really well for me up till now. I'm sure your experience has been similar as well. So can you also talk us through a little bit your career? Like you talked a little bit about where you are today, but where did you first start out, so that maybe opportunities for our participants to see what kind of paths are possible?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm from a pretty ordinary background, in the sense that I grew up in South Wales. I went to a state school, a comprehensive school. Both my parents worked, and they encouraged us. I've got a younger brother and an older sister. They encouraged us to follow with passion whatever interested us. And for me, it was always sport. I loved football from a very young age, watching and supporting, but also playing. And, all of the childhood pictures of me have got of me with a football in my hand or at my feet. And I mainly just played with boys, in the village where I grew up, and with my brother and my cousins. And because I could play, I was never excluded from any games. I was always picked on the boys' side. But of course, there was no structured women's football at that time, or girls' football. And by the time I got to 12 or 13, it was apparent that there was no route to play properly. And I could just remember feeling how unfair that was, because boys were going on to be picked for, local teams. And I was as good as them, but, I wasn't able to play. And in fact, the boys found that unfair as well, because they knew I could play, So even the boys could recognize this wasn't a fair system. And then, from there, I probably stopped playing properly for a few years. And then I went to university in London, to the London School of Economics. And I realised that there were a few clubs in London, that I could play and train with. So I trained more than played with Millwall Lionesses. And then when I went back from university to do my PhD in Cardiff University, I joined Cardiff City Ladies. And that was the team I played with pretty much all my career then, because they got promoted to the Premier League, as was. And then I played 24 times my country, which was a huge honour. Yeah. And I was captain. And, that was kind of probably my childhood dream, to have played for the team I supported, Cardiff City, and to represent my country was probably everything that I could have hoped for. So in a sense, everything is downhill from that. But, when I did retire, I was really conscious that I wanted to put something back into the game and be involved in the governance of the sport.
That's great. I mean, you were slightly luckier than me. I think we're around the same, age. There was no playing opportunity here. Interesting enough, growing up in Turkey, we had many sports possible for girls. I swam, I played water polo, I played basketball, but football definitely was not one of them. But I had the opportunity to start playing 7 years ago in an adult recreational league.
It's important.
And I think quite a few of our colleagues are also playing in adult leagues in England as well. And it's so much fun to finally be able to play in the game. But so football for you was definitely something you grew up with, and the choice is very natural. But you've had different roles outside of football as well. What are the three most important aspects of any role for you? What do you look for?
Yeah, I mean, the other area I work in is politics, as you know. I'm a professor at Cardiff University, and I specialise in constitutional politics, particularly in the UK. So I work a lot around devolution and relationships between central government and national government in Scotland and Wales. That's my main area of interest. But I think whatever roles I take on, I look very closely to see if there are roles where challenge and critique will be accepted. I've been within organisations and on boards where there's a lack of receptiveness to challenge, and that's not for me, because the way my mind works is constantly to ask the what if question or the alternative to what's already happening. It's just the way I'm wired, and lots of people think about this. But of course, some organisations are very conservative, aren't they? And they don't really want to be pushed out of their comfort zone and to be asked questions that might mean they have to rip up their strategy and think again. So I've tended...
What are some of the strategies? I'm sorry to interrupt, but like in those cases, how do you go about challenging?
Well, for me, it's always based on the principle of polite respect for the other people in the room, whether that's a board or an executive, and to try and understand the history of why that organisation has got to where it currently is. I think I'm a kind of consensual person. I'm not confrontational in my style, so I never go into debates looking to have an argument with somebody or row. I mean, sometimes one's forced into that space where it does become a confrontation, but I don't seek that out. I never have done. And I'm not ego driven. You know, I really recognize that we all work in teams, and we're only as strong as the weakest link in our teams. So it's really important to delegate and to try and build a unity in the team, as you would in a football team, really. Sure. You know, you need a left back and a striker and a goalkeeper, not people the same. And that's, I think, probably where my commitment to diversity comes in as well, because, you know, I'm really conscious. That's part of the things I look for, by the way. I'm really conscious that it's not just about representational diversity. We need women in the room. We need, you know, people from different ethnic backgrounds and different experiential backgrounds. But we also need cognitive diversity, exactly. You know, people who think differently and will come at something from a very different angle. But of course, identity is part of that, because if you're a woman, you're likely to have had a different upbringing to a man, or a white person with a non-white person, and so on. So those things I always look for. How diverse is the organisation? If it's not very diverse, has it got an appetite for change? And going back to UEFA, I mean, it would be very easy to be critical of UEFA and FIFA for their lack of diversity in power structures. But in fairness to UEFA, there's a real appetite to change that now, I sense. And the review that we're doing around gender equality, I think hopefully will bring some real dividends. So that's the other thing. And that's two, isn't it? What other thing do I look for in organisations? I look for their values, definitely. And diversity could be one of those. But I look to see how much they really believe in a values base as an anchor to what they do, rather than just, you know, paint it on a wall as if it's a slogan. So, you know, if I was asked to do something, I'll always look under the skin and see if they behave as they say they should, rather than just
walk the talk, right? Yeah,
exactly. Rather than just paste it on a whiteboard and expect everybody to get excited about it. So I'm very values driven. That's a key thing for me. And if I'm on an organisation board, and I have been on a few of these where I don't feel the values are right, I'm quite relaxed about just stepping away. And sometimes I do it in a way that they don't even know it's because of that, you know, because, you know, I don't sense they want to change, and I don't feel a responsibility. It's up to them to do what they do. But it's not for me, you know, and I don't mind just ducking out at that point.
Yeah, you're right. You're right in that approach, and challenging a general thought should not also be the responsibility of the one or two diverse people in the room either. Right. And I agree with you that cognitive diversity is extremely important, but I also want to see a white person, you know, looking after you know, the rights or challenging any policy that is not protecting the protected characteristics. Or I'm also finding lately that every time I'm talking to somebody about, you know, women in football, automatically they think that, it's women's football, or you work in women's football, or you should work in women's football, which we all love and are very passionate about supporting women's football. But equally, we need to recognize that there are even more women working in the men's game side. You can't really pick up one side without taking care of the other side.
The point you make about allies and sponsors and champions is really important, because, you know, if you look at the history of women's football pretty much across Europe, but definitely in the British Isles, you know, there was a 50-year ban on women playing. Now, it wasn't women banning women, it was men banning women. So men have got a responsibility to contribute even more, because if you invested everything from football into the women's game, it wouldn't make up for half a century of neglect. So, you know, we need to be a bit more strident in calls for men to champion this as well. And there are some great men, by the way, who champion women's football. But, you know, we need them on side in every environment, so that it isn't women who are having to use up their political capital by raising issues all the time, and therefore labelled troublemakers or agitators or whatever it is.
Definitely. So you are, you know, Welsh, and you speak Welsh, and why is this important to you? Does the whole family speak in Welsh? Or?
I mean, I don't know how many people on the call or watching later know about Wales, but obviously we have two official languages, Welsh and English. And the official bit is really important because it's transformed our use of the language. So I was reading something this week that said Welsh is the most successful minority language anywhere in Europe. I mean, it's spoken by a third of the population, but that's very regionally diverse. So in it, I mean, I live in Cardiff now, although I'm not from Cardiff. And in the area of Cardiff I live, you'd probably say it's about 60% Welsh speaking, but that's completely driven by Welsh medium education. So my daughters both go to Welsh medium education. So they're bilingual by the time they're 4 in Welsh and English. And then you go to other parts of Wales in the northwest and the southwest, and you'll see 90% Welsh speaking. But why is it important? Because it's a fundamental part of our history and identity. You know, it's one of the oldest languages in the world and one of the very oldest in Europe. And it makes us distinctive. And, you know, what a disgrace it would be if we lost an ancient language. So I think it's a big responsibility for us to use it regularly and to bring our children up to speak the language and to champion it through sport and culture. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done with the Football Association of Wales, where we call the national team Cymru, which means Wales. Everything is bilingual. We have, every player learns the anthem in Welsh so that they can sing it, whether they're an under-17s boy or a senior woman. And that's created a real unity and a bond between the supporters and the Football Association. So, yeah, it's really important. And it's the thing probably, I mean, the thing I'm most proud of is being Welsh and being a Welsh woman particularly. You know, it's a really important part of my identity. So, yeah, of course, championing Welsh is part of that.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So just a little bit of maybe, again, the boardroom. I feel that the boards are not diverse enough in many, many ways, needless to say. And we just came across lots of statistics recently. In the Premier League, still 11 of the 20 clubs don't have a woman on their board. EFL is very similar. Ex-players are not on boards. Only 5% of the boardrooms are, they have ex-players. So, and we talked about there's still a lot of work to be done. And what do you think are some of the other solutions? So quota is obviously one, but quota also sometimes becomes a ceiling.
Yeah.
Right. Just as we just recently saw with Lisa, in a way, she said she's not going to run against, another woman just for one seat. Why have only one woman on the board? Let's go for a second seat. So quotas on one hand is a blessing. I think without a quota, it's very difficult sometimes for women to be on boards, but it can also become a ceiling as well. So what are some other solutions we should be striving for? I know you're working on this gender equality solutions within the UEFA executive committee, but what are some of the pathways that we can strengthen?
Well, we're doing lots of them already, and you are in Women in Football and lots of other organisations, but we need to accelerate them, obviously, because there's a whole exercise in educating men about why women should be involved in all of those environments, and changing the culture to facilitate that to happen. Because, anywhere in Europe, which is obviously where I work, women still do the lion's share of childcare and domestic responsibilities. And in some parts of Europe, women would do all of it, So we have to change cultures to recognise that women need to be freed of other roles, to be able to have time and attention and resource to be involved in governing a sport like football. And we need to persuade men of that as well, so that's a really important piece of work, which is ongoing, I guess. Those of us who have got some status or office in football need to sponsor other women. We need to mentor and develop and sponsor and bring on and encourage and cajole and coax women to believe that they are the right person for a role, because there's so many talented women out there who won't put themselves forward for things because they feel perhaps they're not perfect in the role. And none of us are perfect. There's lots of things that we don't know about, football that because football's, business at the end of the day, isn't it? It's an industry. I don't know anything about commercial aspects of broadcasting, for example, but you can still ask good questions by way of scrutiny and challenge on them. But I think sometimes women need more confidence to believe that they are the right person for it, whereas, of course, more men will put themselves forward with, believe they are able to do it, even if they have a poorer skill set than the women they're facing. So I think we can all encourage that. I think quotas have a really important role. I mean, I won't say I'm a fan of quotas, although I am. But when you say it like that, it sounds like you championing quotas as being a wonderful thing. They're a wonderful thing because we've been forced into a position where we have to have them.
Yeah.
And without quotas, it's unlikely I would be on UEFA Exco. And you make a point about Lisa, who's a good colleague and friend of mine. And she should be on Exco. She's got a lot to contribute. Hopefully the work we're doing around gender representation will facilitate more women to come through. But whilst the culture is unchanged or is changing too slowly, we need to enhance quotas rather than move away from them. So, you could talk about critical mass on an organisation of being 35, 40%. So, we need to work towards that quickly. And if that necessitates quotas, so be it, I feel very strongly about that because we won't change the culture quickly enough without having more women in prominent positions, because for younger women coming through now, they've got to be able to see women of our generation doing things in sport and football to feel that's a path that they can tread to. So I think we need to do all of that simultaneously, and not us as women. Men need to be doing it. It's really important that the men currently involved in football champion this agenda.
Yeah. Well, they look around the room, hopefully, and say, well, we're missing some voices here, right?
Yeah.
So that's the important part. I think the governing bodies so far have done an okay job in the last sort of decade or so to putting in these quotas. The recent one was also ECA, confederations, but how do we trickle it down to member associations and then from them into the professional clubs, right? It just needs to, because it can't be only about putting 10 more women into these, governing bodies. It needs to be trickling down to all the different levels of football organizations. So I think that's the challenge.
I agree.
Really.
And it's carrot and stick, isn't it? I think there has to be incentives, but there also has to be safeguards to make sure that national associations or member associations and clubs don't think that the current composition of the board is good enough, So we have to create conditions and regulations around that, as well as incentives and education and development.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess maybe let's talk a little bit about the women's football side, which we did, but what more can we do all together to make sure that women's football is not just getting the visibility? It is getting the visibility now, but in my opinion, the bigger problem is more around generating that investment and the revenues. There has been a lot of debate around, obviously, the fact that some of the top European markets has not yet finalized their broadcasting agreements for the upcoming World Cup. There has been lots of debates about whether unbundling has actually helped women's football or not. Some owners are very convinced they are investing and happy to incur losses, but some are still, not necessarily putting the same kind of investment into women's football. What would be some things you think needs to be done in order to...
Yeah, well, we were chatting about this, weren't we, earlier? I think strategically we need to have a really wide-ranging debate about what the women's game can take from the men's game and what it should leave behind. And I'm not sure we're doing that in the right way yet. I think because the women's game is growing so fast, we've seen the exponential growth of the women's game for participation. Every country reports massive participation growth, or most countries do, at the elite side, in attendances, in commercial input, all of those areas, broadcast attention. But there's a danger that we just think what we need to do is do what the men's game has been doing and therefore we'll be successful. But for me, it's a case of trying to really disentangle what's unique about the women's game and have a conversation about where there may be even better, more sustainable opportunities then. We've seen some big companies like Visa, for example, turn their attention to the women's game and not get so involved in the men's version of football. And that's quite powerful, isn't it? Because they're telling the women's game that it is a better product for them. Their values are better and more appropriate for what Visa wants to do with its next commercial strategic profile. So I think there needs to be a proper conversation where we almost kind of disassemble football and say, look, these things work really well in the men's game, but is that right for the women's game? Does it fit our values? Yeah. The women's game's always been different, hasn't it, in many respects? The values have been different, the behaviours have been different, the voices have been different. I often say women players are so political compared to male players. They'll speak out on equality and diversity and racism and they don't worry about it. Now, it's easy to say that's because they don't have such big sponsorship deals or they're nervous, but I think that's probably not it at all. I think it's because women have had to battle. Even the top players now have had to battle at some point in their career to be a footballer. And they recognise that the generation that went before them had to battle even more. Yeah. So every generation is aware that this is a political phenomenon, if you like. Yeah. And that's why I think women footballers now, obviously there's loads you could quote, but all of them feel that they must use the platform they have to champion improvements in the game. I think that's really powerful.
But being outspoken actually is driving more new fan base who before was not really involved with, sports, because they find their values are more aligned maybe with female athletes, female players. And there are very interesting studies out there which shows that, fans, actually loyal fans do want that approach, that their favorite players be standing for something.
There was some really interesting research presented before the Champions League last week in Eindhoven by UEFA and Portas Communication around where the growth opportunities are for the women's game, and the fan environment is massive because it's a different fan base, but it's not just girls and women, it's families and men and young men, and it's people who might not watch other sports, and are coming in differently. And so the thing that stood out for me in that presentation was that the fans want to know the life stories of the players. They want to get behind the scenes to see them as a person, not just as an athlete. And that's something, again, that chimes well with a lot of corporate investment that might come our way. So we need that conversation before we can really map out how women's football might grow in a different way to men's, because there's lots of things wrong with the men's game. We'd all admit that, and football isn't a perfect environment. So let's learn and let's discard the bits we don't want and build on the bits we do.
Yeah, take some shortcuts on lessons learned, definitely. Well, I have tons of questions for you, but I think we have some questions coming in from our wonderful participants and our audience as well. What's the best piece of advice you have been given?
Well, I've been given loads of really good pieces of advice by all the mentors I've used over the years, or who've worked with me and helped me no end. I guess I'd pick a few things, really. I'd say, first of all, treat other people as you'd wish to be treated yourself. And never become arrogant, and never think that any status you have necessarily should change you. I hope, I'm still the same person I was when I was kicking a ball around in Bridgend growing up. And I think people keep you grounded, don't they? If you keep your friends and your family who will always remind you that, there are more important things in life than being involved in football governance, which is your friends and your family. That's really important. But treating people as you'd like to be treated, I think, is fundamental. I mean, you look at any of the psychological stuff that's out there, and people will always remember how you made them feel, not what you said or what you did. So, I'm always conscious when I'm working with people that you should be making them feel empowered and excited about work and professional things they're involved with, and also respected. That's really important. But that they feel you've listened to them, and you haven't just pursued something and done that cosmetic thing of just listening but not acting on what they've told you. Yeah. So I think that's a really important piece of advice,
Definitely.
And keep learning. I mean, I never think that you've learned everything and you know everything, because patently you don't. And that allows you to become inquisitive and to listen to advice and criticism from others. And it makes you a better person as well as a better professional.
I think all of these are important for any age group or any level of people, but even more important for Gen Z. I mean, I have 2 kids in that age group, and I know how they want to be treated, and they don't necessarily want to have that hierarchical, top down, I told you to do this type. They want to be more independent. They definitely want to be respected and recognized and given that freedom to bring in their creativity into a role as well.
Organizations have to be open to that kind of age generational diversity as well, because of the nature of how organizations are run. They tend to have older white men in charge who they may have children or grandchildren or whatever, but they're not listening in the same way or giving those voices agency, and we should be listening to younger people who tell us that, how their generation is thinking, and that should be incorporated then into how we run football and how we run sport more generally.
Yeah. I think, we talk a lot about mentoring, and a lot of the times I tell potential mentees, this is not a one-way relationship, it's a two-way relationship.
Absolutely.
And you have something to bring to the table as well. So don't think of it as, being grateful for someone mentoring you, but you actually have something to offer back to them as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And we are sometimes missing that perspective, obviously. Another question, what sport could football learn from, if any, in what way? I mean, is there another sport that's doing things slightly better than us?
I'm not going to pick one, but, obviously I was involved with UK sport and Sport Wales, and I've always loved every sport. There isn't a sport that I have watched in a Commonwealth Games or an Olympics or Paralympics or World Championship which I haven't enjoyed. I can watch any sport. I'm just mad on sport generally. So I think there's something you can learn from every single sport. I mean, rugby is the second biggest sport behind football in Wales. And there's things that rugby have done badly wrong, but there are things that rugby are doing which are really positive as well. I think cricket, the way cricket has reinvented itself with short formats like the 100 and, T20 and so on, is important, because if we think about the future of football, not everybody is going to want to play 11-a-side, 90-minute football. They don't now. We know how hard that is when you've got a family to, give up the best part of a day to play football by the time you've travelled. People want short, sharp versions of a sport now. So 5-a-side, 7-a-side, futsal, whatever. Cricket has given some good examples of that in the past. Gymnastics. I mean, our 2 girls do gymnastics, and when I see them, I really wish I'd done gymnastics as a kid, because it gives you such body control and flexibility and awareness of how your physical prowess can work. And I went straight into team sports. I played netball, hockey, football, athletics, track and field. And actually, your body is far less flexible and able if you do that than if you do gymnastics first, So I think gymnastics should be the foundation for every sport. I think it should be right at the heart of physical literacy. From 3 until 7, everybody does gymnastics, and then they filter out into the other sports.
Yeah, but I've been admiring how fit you are, your arms. I'm going into the gym tomorrow.
No.
For sure. Okay, World Cup prediction, finalists.
Oh, wow. That's really tough, isn't it? I mean, I wish Wales were there. We lost out in the UEFA playoffs to Switzerland in the last minute of extra time, which would have meant we'd have gone on to the final playoff. But in the absence of Wales, not that I think we would have won it, although you never know. I think there's European teams which will be very powerful, the likes of France and England. Germany are a tournament team, aren't they? They always pull something out. Spain, who knows what
they
state
solve their
exactly.
problem
but if they've got their players back from injury and so on. But then you look at the USA. I mean, Canada, both 2 tremendous teams. And I think, to be fair, Australia are going to be a tough team at home.
Definitely.
They beat England in a friendly. I know that was a friendly, but they beat them and they were the better team. Australia at home with Sam Kerr up front, not going to be easy to get past. And then, the Scandinavian team's always strong. I'm not close enough to know about, the Asian teams at the moment to know how good they are. But, they're going to be tough teams to beat, aren't they, in group stage games. And then once you get out of the group, anything can happen, really.
Of course.
I think it'll be a really competitive tournament.
Football, right? Yeah. Because it's you can never 100% guarantee the outcome. And
it's not all, investment plays a big part. Look at English investment in the Lionesses. Brilliant, and they're the European champions. So, of course, they will go well prepared. But, there's other teams that will have less investment, that will have great unity and a couple of star players. And as we know, you get out of the group. Look at Wales men. We got to the semi-finals of Euro 2016, smallest nation ever to get to the semis. Yeah. And nobody gave us a chance of getting out of the group. So, you get momentum, don't you, in a tournament? And there'll be a surprise package, won't there, somewhere in that tournament?
Definitely. And what do you hope can come from this World Cup going forwards in women's football?
Well, raise the profile, really important, and it will. I know people will say in Europe and the US the timing of games is problematic, but it's not that problematic, It's easy to watch games or record games and watch them, and there'll be a whole generation of girls who won't have seen top class football of that standard being played before. So I hope it'll excite a whole generation of young girls to think that they can play. Whether they're going to ever become as good as, Sam Kerr or Megan Rapinoe or anybody else, the fact remains that they can play and enjoy football. I hope that it'll sell football to a new commercial broadcast audience, so we don't have the battles that we have currently. Yeah. And I hope it exposes again the lack of agency that women have in the game, because as more people are attracted to the game, more eyes will be trained to organisations. And where there are no women around the table, everybody will be saying, look, this is crazy. What are we going to do about it? So I think if you get those three things out of the World Cup, it'll have been a great success.
Yeah. Football Australia just announced last week, the amount of funding they have received from the governments for legacy, as well as where it was spent. A huge investment was made in facilities, but equally in participation and developing the future leaders for the game as well. And I think that part is, of course, extremely important, because a World Cup at the end of the day is a great 1 month event, years of preparation, but it also is meant to leave some long-lasting projects.
And just to add to that, facilities as well, because, girls and women's football is the poor relation facility-wise often, and girls can't play unless there's quality facilities, and if you live in a country like Wales where there's lots of rain, grass pitches are just not good enough. So girls are the lowest in the pecking order often. So I think we need a really big programme for facility investment as well.
Definitely. And we also talk about a lot, it's wonderful to have the women's teams playing in the big stadiums of the clubs, the men's stadiums, but also if you cannot fill it, it's both very costly, and also on TV, it doesn't look good. So is there a need for smaller size stadiums that can be maybe shared among some of the women's teams, but it's not your 50, 60,000 capacity stadiums, but rather the more compact 15 to 20,000, which would have an amazing atmosphere and it will fill up every game.
Yes, I think we need to think about this as horses for courses, really, because every country, if it's a national team, every country's in a different position. If it's a club team, same. So, it's quite right that the teams in England, are playing at the men's stadiums for some of their games, at least, Manchester United, Chelsea, Arsenal, whatever. And obviously the England women's team are filling Wembley. For us, we went from, in the last World Cup qualifying campaign, we went from attendances of 3,500 in the beginning of the campaign to 15,500 at the end. So it shows how quickly growth can happen. But you're right, we need to think more about stadiums. But I think we take a gamble, even in the Champions League. PSV Eindhoven was sold out, 34,000. We'll be playing the next Champions League final in Bilbao, which is 50,000, is it, or 55,000? Let's sell it out, let's be ambitious.
For finals, it always sells out.
Other games,
it's more for the league games and your, week in and out.
But we need to think about the appropriateness of the stadia for sure. But let's not ever try and, be too unambitious about this, because the game is growing so fast, and it's such a pleasure to see so many people wanting to see women's games.
Yeah, I actually, when I look around the stadium in a women's match and see the whole crowds, it's just really giving me goosebumps every time. So I asked you about what is a good piece of advice you received, but now let's flip it over and say, what would you give as advice to your younger self? A very classical question, but...
Well, I'd say, first of all, don't rush things. And back to our original conversation, be prepared to accept failure along the way and almost embrace that, because it will make you better and stronger and a more resilient person and probably a better person. So don't get too frustrated when things don't go entirely your way. So be patient, be resilient, and don't give up. I mean, I've seen some really talented women give up after one blow, one failure. And it's been really disappointing for me, because you can see how much talent they've got, but they sort of feel, oh gosh, I can't go through that again. But you can, you can. And when I've been through things as you have, 2 or 3 times until you get to the place you want to get to. And it's even sweeter when you get there then. So just remember that, and use that as your incentive. Gosh, what else would I say? I guess I'd say, don't lose the passion. The passion is really important. You need to show that you have a great emotional connection with what you're doing and a real regard and care for, in this case, football. And it's good to show that passion. Don't be too professional so you iron it out and extract it from yourself. I mean, I think being passionate about what you do is one of the most attractive traits that people can have. And for me, if I'm looking to work with somebody or appoint somebody, for example, if they show a real emotional passion for what they're doing, that's a big plus for me, a massive tick. And it would be ahead of any competence that they can offer, really, that they've got that real enthusiasm and energy and drive to enact change.
Yeah, I think passion is so easy to detect and shines through in whatever you do. If you're passionate about what you're doing, I think you'll always be much more motivated and much more successful. Maybe one of the last questions about what is one thing you would like to be remembered for?
It's like writing your own obituary.
Not necessarily that, but one of my favorite sort of professors at Harvard was Clayton Christensen. And obviously he wrote lots of books on strategy, but, in his kind of last years when he was sick, he talked more about what he wants to be remembered for. And it was more about touching people's hearts, making a difference in people's lives. So it's not about just the successes you might get in your career, but it's about making that difference and balancing the material needs with these intrinsic motivations.
Oh, of course, and I think we all want to be remembered for having some impact or making a difference. But I think I'd go, to a more basic level even than that and say, I would like to be recognized as a decent person, as a good person who puts other people first, and isn't driven by ego or my own personal gain in any way. And then I think if you are that person, then that puts you in a position where you can build relationships that will make an impact. So don't lose yourself, and always be true to your own values and your background and the people who are important to you. And I think that's a precursor to go on then to be in a position where you can make the difference that you'd like to make. And that for me is everything, be a good person, keep your roots, your anchors, and then, use that where that takes you to try and bring other people into that space and make a difference in this case in football.
Yeah. And maybe as last sort of topic, social impact, social change. I just saw today a new UEFA campaign has been launched, Football, with the capital all. And so how do you see the role of the governing bodies for all this social impact and social change initiatives?
It's really important. And I think it's a great campaign. I mean, we, like everything, we have to see how that is put into practice, of course, but it's a good initiative, a really good initiative. And I think football just has that kind of breadth of reach and scope of interest that goes beyond any other sport. We talked about other sports earlier, but football is so big compared to every other sport that it's incumbent on us to use that breadth of reach to generate social good. I mean, things like environmental and matters and sustainability. I mean, the UEFA's got its own sustainability strategy, and we have in Wales, which is quite powerful. Well-being and future generations planning, so we future-proof everything we do in sport to make sure it's environmentally sound and so on. And equality, the fact that we don't accept that football's history conditions its future, because, the history of football is of a game for men. And now we've got to move it in a new direction. So I think we keep those things at the forefront of our mind, and we invest smartly, and we listen to the voices of people whose voices haven't been heard. Yeah. And then in the future, football will be, a game for everyone. I mean, it's not at the moment. We know that, and that's why it's so important that we recognise the power of the game as well.
Well, it's been amazing to have you. And let me turn this way to try and, close the webinar. I think we had an amazing hour together. I'm sure our participants have enjoyed it as well. I'm very lucky to be taking Laura out to dinner now and continue this conversation. And if there's any great takeaways from that as well, I'll be happy to share with our wonderful participants. We'll be following you very closely, all the wonderful causes that you champion, and best of luck in this new role. We are very, very proud of you as our Women in Football member to be taking on such an important role, but equally also as a friend. I think I have to say I'm so proud of you, and thank you to all our participants for coming on today. And the recording will be available later on for those who couldn't make it to watch, or those of you who want to watch it again. So thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the evening.
Thank you. Thanks, Ebru. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.